in the state of Maryland, I must tell you that we're being recorded. You probably will have gotten a notice on this. And I'm also going to do the AI accompaniment so that we can have notes about this later, which might be interesting. I'm just trying to, hang on. Okay. All right, I'd like to welcome everybody to today's Journal Club that has been kindly put together by Caterina Pesce and her colleagues. This was actually a paper that appeared in Journal of Motor Learning and Development in 2025 and is actually, quote, a position paper, but I'll let Caterina explain what it is and how it came to be. But I think that this is going to be one of those talks that will be just fun for us to do. I see one of your co-authors just came on. Yes.
Emiliano, yes.
Emiliano, hello. He's there. He hasn't unmuted himself yet. Okay, over to you, Caterina.
Thank you. So first of all, thank you, Jane, so much for inviting me. And thank you all who are very late or very early in the morning here for me. And thank you for being here. We will say then how it developed, but it's a paper only of intersection of ideas. I try to show you the outline, then to have more discussion than speaking from me. I start a bit outside the paper, so to tell you how where it is embedded in. So beyond the mind-body dichotomy, from a philosophical proposition to an embodied account of mind and learning. And then I move on with further intersections in my field, physical activity and cognition research, and how in my field the role of skill acquisition emerged. And then trying again to go beyond the mind-body dichotomy, but specifically in the science of creativity. And then we will address the issue if we give ideas some legs or legs some ideas. And finally, we look at motor creativity as an expression of motor competence. And we address the embodiment, embedment, and active man and expanded creativity. I start here. Exactly, I start now in this figure, addressing pairwise the points of the figure. So physical activity and motor learning and development. I go back to philosophy because it is inherent every time. So most of us know René Descartes, cogito ergo sum, I think, then I am. And fewer people know Pierre Gassendi, his coeval, ambul ergo sum, I move, I walk, then I am. And this has implications also in our field, where cognitive sciences and the computative mind and movement dominated for a long time our approach to the mind and its internal representations rather than the body with its physical movements. And so the cognitive approach of movement and learning dominated for a while with relevant implications also for practice. But if we consider that way, then it is more consistent with the ecological dynamics perspective on learning, where the peripheral features of the body and environment, you all know, may trigger movements without reliance on mental representations. So the issue of the role of mental representations or representational sciences. Of course, I enjoy seeing that both in kinesiology and in neuroscience, there are several attempts to integrate the top-down cognitive and the bottom-up ecological dynamics perspectives. And of course, we have people as David who very well integrate it in his works. Interesting might be thinking for me in terms then moving toward also cognition and creativity approaches as the skilled intentionality framework. So do we perform mindless skills, so mindless skillfulness, or do we have intentionality in moving, so mindful intentionality, what I want to say is there is a lot of debate if we should repeat to learn skills or explore and try to allow skills to emerge from constraints and affordances. But what I think is if we shift, they are two sides of the same coin. If we repeat intentionally movements until we reach the mindless skillfulness, but skillfulness is not is a means and not as a goal, then it means that we develop and learn skills, but then we have, in this way, we enhance the pool of potential skills we can use in problem-solving situations. So skillfulness not as a means, as a means, not as a goal, as the possession of relevant skills necessary for being able to act on affordances and progress in the mind-body environment interaction. This to say so that we have different approaches, physical activity, how to approach to use physical activity tasks for motor learning, the main approaches which now converge nicely. And what is the role now of this physical activity and motor learning with respect to exercise, physical activity and cognition research, and how these paths converge on the role of skill acquisition? Let me explain. This is this path, physical activity and cognition. This is where I searched most. And you may remind that a nice paper of John Best started questioning maybe it is not only the metabolic demands of exercise, of physical exercise, which matter when we gain cognitive efficiency through movement, but it might be also the cognitive task complexity and the coordinative task complexity, so the motor skill demands, which might act as mechanisms underlying the effects of physical activity on cognition. And I also named that those response relation and quality response relation. So I asked in physical activity and cognition research to focus on the qualitative characteristics of physical activity, so to see if also skill learning coordination matter. And indeed, there were then several reviews. This was one of the first, but a lot of other people looking at the motor skill demands, cognitive demands, and not only the metabolic demands of physical activity, how they might impact during development and across the lifespan cognitive function. Then with Tilton Porosky, we proposed firstly the skill acquisition mechanism. That is a metaphor. We speak of metaphors are brain hardware and software, which are all the same in our brain, in our hardware. But so thinking of frequency, intensity, time, and type, we can consider the quantity, frequency, intensity, time related to the metabolic exercise demands, which increase brain health and therefore cognition. But on the other side, if my movements are enriched with motor skill demands, which are crucial, then we have skill acquisition processes, which might be a mechanism through which I directly impact inhibition, working memory, cognitive flexibility, planning, creativity, through the demands of the physical activity task, especially when the movements are not have not reached the automatized level yet. And somebody followed me, so relevant neuroscientists groups, especially the Magin, Sebastian Ludiga, who made a strong meta-analysis showing that maybe the coordinative components of exercise mattered most to gain cognitive function. Especially for children, for example, this review on working memory showed clearly that the benefits of exercise were more pronounced, specific for exercise with high coordinative demands. So coordination matters as a means to improve cognition. He explained it very nicely, showing two paths, one unspecific path, the bottom, and one specific path, the top. So the unspecific is related to the energy demands of exercise. So the brain is the cerebrovascular circulation is improved, the BDNF production is improved, and so we have unspecific effects on the brain. But the motor skill demands of coordinative exercise also can generate activation, proactive control, allocation of resources, which are very specific, have very specific effects on those working memory functions which are challenged during motor skill acquisition. This is the path which brought the physical activity and cognition researchers toward considering the key role not only of metabolic but also of coordinative and motor skill demands. Let's see the other side of the coin. So the motor developmentalists you belong to, and so you have here the most relevant, some of the most relevant reviews which progressively were published, showing that motor competence is a key relevant aspect for positive trajectories of health, both of physical health and also of cognitive and socio-emotional health, even though the evidence on this latter is less strong and in need of more research. This being said very generally, but the important thing is that all motor developmentalists, so I met with great pleasure on my path, are interested especially in physical activity and cognition research on the arm of this area, which considers the qualitative components of physical activity and the motor skill and motor learning demands. So the two paths come close and intersect. Nicely, also there are from the developmental side of so neurosciences and cognitive development, also contribution clearly showing that not physical activity per se, not its dose and frequency, duration, much more the motor skills of the children are linked to motor development. So it is strongly likely that the motor skill demands of physical activity then matter. So there are converging evidence which focus on these paths. And nicely, there was recently in the Journal of Motor Learning and Development, this review showing just focusing on motor learning demands in physical activity and their possible impact on executive function of children. So the attention to motor coordination and motor learning is increasing in exercise and cognition research and in motor developmental and learning research. And interestingly, he tried to also analyze the motor demands, the motor learning demands of the interventions, but he couldn't find the effects of motor learning, of physical activity with motor learning components on cognition being specifically affected by given features, qualitative or quantitative, of the physical activity tasks. So most important, motor learning had a positive effects on executive functions. Moderators were not clear. And very nicely, I come closer so also to creativity research. There are colleagues from Greece, Vasilopoulos, who performed a meta-analysis in which they looked whether physical activity which fostered creativity, so physical activity involving creativity demands, also impacted cognitive outcomes better than traditional or conventional physical activity without specific creativity demands. They could not find a larger effect of physical activity fostering cognition for executive function and cognition. But in any case, they couldn't find, exactly as Richter et al. In the other review, could not find moderators. So they could not see that more variability of practice, more demands of this kind in motor learning could have larger effects. This is likely, this is what I wrote in my paper, that the way variability was applied in the individual studies reviewed by Richter et al. And Vasilopoulos et al. Did not allow in the most cases for the identification of the underlying pedagogy. The latter, however, could be crucial in making the practice design more or less effective in fostering children's cognition. So likely how the interventions are reported do not allow to clearly understand which are the delivery and the pedagogies underlying the physical activity interventions, which might be responsible for larger or smaller effects on cognitive function. But we are coming step by step closer to addressing this. And for that reason, I go to the next point, moving toward creativity and asking if we should give ideas some legs or legs some ideas. That is, we are now here from cognition, we link it to creativity and of course to motor creativity. And the first problem is, so motor creativity, what is it? Is it a domain specific type of creativity, or we think creativity, creatively, but we express it in movement as young children do? Or what is tactical sports creativity, which is used by top-level athletes and makes the difference in top-level performance? So there is an initial definition, measurement, determinants, and a little bit a chicken and egg problem. So what comes first, the idea, and then we handle creatively, or we handle creatively and then we recognize it as a creative idea. So maybe it helps considering that in creativity research, there is a lot of research on the creative persons, the creative process, and the creative product. So the creative person is the cognitive account for sports creativity. The creative person is focused in the cognitive account of sports creativity, whereas the creative process is focused in the ecological dynamic account of motor and sports creativity. I will explain it later. And the creative product is the resultant of the interplay of creative thinking, motor, or sports creativity. So where are we? We are in the middle. Motor and sports creativity, likely the creative person who thinks creatively, but also the very skilled person in motor competence who have then a lot of motor skills which enable to be creative in movement. And there are some nice studies from a Swiss group on that. On the one side, so thinking of the creative person and sports creativity, it has been investigated more in terms of mindful motor creativity. So sport games have tactical creativity as a trainable and divergent thinking ability that translates into creative actions. I think creatively, tactically, and I translate it in creative actions. On the other side, we have the mindless motor creativity, so as emerging and a process that enhances the functionality of movements. Nice is also to consider the names of the authors who are working there to understand where we move next. So, for example, the interesting is that, yes, Daniel Memmert, you can see with Sara Santos. Sara Santos worked with Schollhorn on differential learning. She worked with ecological dynamics people, but also with Daniel Memmert, who was in the tactical creative thinking, and Sarah came from rather ecological dynamics. But also in the next, also all in frontiers in psychology, the next one, creative motor actions as emerging from movement variability, Daniel Memmert together with Savelsberg, that is motor developmentalist with an ecological approach and the thinking creativity cognitive approach. And then again, John Carney, motor development, with Veronique Richard, an emerging researcher, a strong researcher in creativity and motor creativity coming together. So motor development, creativity researchers, ecological dynamic researchers, and those with the cognitive approach are coming together toward creativity. And then I also came with some ideas asking, okay, since the cognitive psychologists and ecological dynamic scientists and motor developmentalists converge on creativity, should we think that as the cognitive psychologists we give ideas some legs, we think and then act, or the other way around? That is, we cope with constraints, and in the attempt to satisfy constraints, some original solutions emerge we were not taught in advance. So, and then let us look to solve this problem at the uniqueness of motor creativity. So in the past, Merleau-Ponty told our body is holder of an unsolvable ambiguity. I am the body and I have a body. So the domain of motor creativity is likely the best suited to overcome the dualistic ambiguity, because I am the owner of the body and I am the creator of the bodily movements. So having and being the body is the most interesting. Only in our domain we have this kind of very uniqueness. So another thing, siloed thinking. You will see in my paper, I say, okay, the problem is siloed thinking. If you read Arne Dietrich, a wonderful neuroscientist of creativity, who also is an athlete and studied also the flow in athletes. So he developed a model of creativity which, when you read how he speaks, looks like the language of ecological approach to motor competence and creativity. He says that there is a deliberate, conscious, effortful, intentional, highly cognitive demanding mode of creativity, a spontaneous, unconscious, effortless, with low cognitive demand, and a sort of sensory motor flow mode with not at all cognitive control in flow. So, and the flow mode looks really like the language of the ecological approach scientists, I find. And let's come to the last point. So we looked first at physical activity and motor learning and the different theories. Then we looked how physical activity is linked to cognition and the role of skill acquisition in this relationship. Then how cognition and creativity are linked, and which is the role of motor creativity in the development of the overall creativity. And now the last step is how creativity is linked to motor learning and development. You may remind those who were in Ghent, I was looking at how the motor competence, the true scientist in motor competence, as you are, develop the understanding of it. So we had the fundamental movement skills, but then some complementary interpretations of foundational movement skills, which expand the concept of fundamental movement skills and also look more at their adaptability. And then the nice paper by Rudd, a fundamental might of movement with a functional solution. So looking more and more at the functionality of movements rather than a given picture of what is the best characteristics of a movement skill. And if we think of functionality, and then we add one piece, which is the, explain you originality, we move into creativity. But the functionality and the adaptability of motor competence, not only being able to be skilled in decontextualized conditions, is linked to an emerging trend also fostered by the ecological dynamics to focus on exploration. So Exploring to Learn, Learn, Explore is a wonderful paper, and also an attempt of a lot of us focusing on exploration as an overarching focus for holistic development. So as far as the motor competence is developing toward more adaptability, then you can see from the motor learning research and the motor developmental research some interest for exploration. Okay, from embodied creativities now, so exploration is central to embodied creativity. Embodied creativity which expands beyond the body so that the creative product emerges from the interaction of creative individuals with their environments, its affordances. So this is language of ecological dynamics. Important is that the creative process is not inside the mind, but takes place in between the individual and the environment they act in. So there are nice, I don't go into detail, but nice theories regarding creativity is embodied but embedded in the environment, inactive because it creates a cascade process which enables us to find more and more solutions, and then expanded to encompass the feature of the environment in our creativity. So our creativity is given also by the features of the affordances in the environment. And thinking of creativity and exploration, so we were in exploration from motor developmentalists, from motor learning scientists. If you, the exploration can be conceived in two ways in creativity, motor creativity research, exploring the coordination and exploring control. So this is a nice paper by Ort et al. With Gerd Savelsberg, of course, and Daniel Mehmet and John Weiderkamp. Exploring coordination means finding a brand new type of coordination. As you can see in the feature, the very famous Fosbury flop which came and changed the entire coordination. But after the Fosbury flop came, there were further ameliorations of the Fosbury flop as the coordination of the arm to maximize its efficacy and efficiency. So this is a way of exploring control, of parametrization of movements, so little, and this is more in terms of functionality. So the originality is a brand new coordination, totally new, and then the functionality can be further improved, exploring the specific control of the motor coordination. This is in creative thinking research, it is also studied, this kind of two ways to be creative and original, but this is named in creative thinking research as a dual pathway to creativity model. So I can change in my creative search for solution, a brand new solution or adaptations of the same solution. So what I labeled thinking outside the box or searching for the infinity within the box. And this is one paper in which, for example, I found that different types of physical activity could foster more in direction of flexibility in changing categories of movement, or more the nuances of the movement to find solutions. And I find nice connections also of this with Rai Ranganathan, for example, who spoke about behavioral flexibility motor skills. And I find a nice intersection of the flexibility motor skill, as they say, implicit, so small parametrization, not under intentional control, parametrization changes, which are needed to be flexible in finding different ways to solve a task. You can do it so changing little parameters which don't need conscious control, or you can explicitly search for behavioral flexibility, intentionally changing your motor coordination. And again, this is the same what we were speaking about in the types of creativity, the deliberate and the spontaneous and flow modes. And these are linked to the cognitive control network responsible of executive function, cognitive control, intentionality, and the default network, which is activated when we are in flow and when we are in not intentionally thinking in the incubation phase, for example, of creativity. We are not thinking of it, and then we find the solution without searching for it. In summary, physical activity meets creativity at the crossroad of development and neurosciences, kinesiology, and pedagogies. Which pedagogies? Those that embrace an exploration-based, creativity-enhancing approach to motor skill learning. And so you see the connections, which were the first one, physical activity and cognition. We focus on cognitively challenging physical activity. Between physical activity and motor learning, this is physical activity requiring a thoughtful learning of novel and complex motor actions. And then the linkage between cognition and creativity, looking at the deliberate, spontaneous, and flow modes of creativity involving different cognitive and sensory motor processes, so also the sensory motor. And then finally, on the very right side, the linkage of motor learning and development with creativity, I see that the time is mature to include in motor competence the motor creativity, because we were moving from fundamental motor skills, more decontextualized, to foundational, to functional. Let's add the originality of motor solutions in our exploration, and we get to motor creativity. And that's all. And I'm sorry if I took a bit more time. Thank you
Oh,
really
no,
for your attention.
no, that was not, that was wonderful. Wow. I'll just say, wow. You have put a lot out here. You actually talk faster than I do, which is amazing. But there, you have really put a lot of things on the table here that are wonderful. So if you would unshare your screen for a moment so that
Yes,
we
yes.
can all,
I thought I had done. Sorry. Yes.
you're back to, there you are. Okay. So as a moderator of this, I'll let questions be raised first. Anybody want to start with a question? Just unmute yourself and raise your hand, or, oh, come on, guys. You're more creative than this. Friedrich, I see you sitting over there in the corner.
I apologize for the confusing and poor English. I
Oh,
told you under stress yesterday in the hospital, so I am not the quiet moments just now. So sorry, because I was aware of my confusing English. I hope you forgive
oh
me for
no.
that,
Jane,
thinking of the ideas behind.
Never apologize for that, please. Never. Carl.
yes, I have a question. Well done. Well done. But one thing that catches my attention is the difference between mindful and mindless creativity. I just wonder how that, explain that a little more, how that could happen, or you would have
Yes.
mindless creativity.
Yes, of course, it is dichotomized. What Arne Dietrich developed as a model was the deliberate, which is more mindful. So it engages executive function, capacity limited resources, and it engages specific networks as the executive control network in the brain. So I intentionally think of possible divergent solutions, then I converge toward the most original or best. So there are processes. Whereas the sensory motor, the flow mode, the unconscious and more the flow mode are more toward the end of the continuum mindless, in the sense that
Uh-huh.
they don't need executive control, but in contrast, it should be deactivated, because the default network should emerge to allow the mind wandering, so that the mind, freed from the chains, the constraints of the control, can wander and can make unusual associations which the control mode would not do. Importantly, and there is also the sensory motor processes which might contribute. It is not that I can use more the one type or the other, but within one creative process, I can also switch between them, among
Yeah.
them.
Thank you.
And the mindful and mindless were a sort of dichotomization, also to say that it is curious that in sports creativity, now it is moving, but at the beginning was all creative thinking, so deliberate mode, so mindful, resource demanding cognition to support the creative process. And also, and then it was focused on high abilities, talent, person, whereas the mindless shifts the focus toward the sensory motor processes, something which is also beyond our control, and that contributes with
Okay.
some routines to our processes.
Yeah.
And okay.
Thank you very much. If I may, one more thing is that when I look at your model, it is so complex. I obviously don't have a real grasp of it, but I would have had at the top of all of your things, motor development, skill, physical activity, I would have had cognition at the very top. Is that arguable?
You're such a cognitive person.
Oh, well, there's a debate there. That's for sure.
Yes,
I
yes,
know.
yes. So I must confess, my feeling is that I developed within the cognitivist type, so where all started in the brain, and then the other approach came, and then integrations
Yeah,
followed after a time.
I see.
I believe that we should not throw out the baby with the bathwater, so that there
Yeah.
are relevant aspects of both, and I would not prioritize. What I can see is that we tend to swing in the science, and then the ecological dynamics had gained momentum some years ago, several years ago, but I would not throw out the baby with the
Ah,
bathwater, because I think that the cognitivism had the merit and can still explain, not all, but a part. So I would not put the cognition at the top, but I would put it
okay.
in between.
Okay.
So,
Well done.
yes. So it is not, I think, therefore I am. It is, I move, therefore I am. As a phenomenologist.
Yeah.
Friedrich has his hand up. Friedrich.
Yeah, well, I just wanted to go back to the previous point, the dichotomy between mindful and mindless, and if I'm not mistaken, that also relates to the um, mindful then cognitive control network, and mindless the default mode control network. Is there any evidence that individuals can intentionally switch between those? Or is it more like a trait? So you have creative persons, or is it also developmentally changing? I can imagine that creativity at a very young age is very mindless, exploration-like. Whereas, especially when school comes in, it becomes probably a bit more mindful process. But my question is it, do you have some people that are or mindful or mindless, or can you deliberately switch between those modes of control, if you like?
Yeah, so this is, I'm not sure that I can answer yet all, but I can say I am not aware of all the literature, so I'm not a high expert in creativity. I've only performed some works. But as regards the problem is the approach to it, because there is a lot of research on highly skills, on genius, and they focus on the traits. And then, Arne Dietrich in his works, for example, says that the different types of creativity modes, one can switch among types during the same creative process. So in one process, you can use partly deliberate and partly sensory motor processes. And also, but in other more educational oriented papers he wrote, Dietrich and Zacco 2023, he also says there might be persons who tend to use more the one type than the other. Honestly, I have not checked the literature, but it might be that we can have some preferences or some tendencies to use more the one or the other. But we can also use along the process, we need diverging, converging, diverging, and likely in the diverging, we might be more sensory motor, and then converging and selecting. So there is, as regards the developmental path, I am not, I'm not an expert, but it could be likely. What I can say is that there was in the past a lot of issues on, a lot of discussion on domain generality or domain specificity of creativity. So if we have some domain generality, then it should be more the trait. Okay, I'm creative in everything. If there is some domain specificity, then it is more linked to learning, to skills. If I have a lot of motor skills, for example, Zano et al. From this Swiss group say it is clear that we need to be creative in the motor domain, a lot of motor skills. Otherwise, I can also think something very creative, I cannot enact it because I don't have the skills. So, and what I wanted to say is, regards with children, likely you are right that they start strongly with the sensory motor, as in the motor development. also in creativity, so like most likely less than the deliberate. The problem is that an issue is that also it is an issue of measurement, because for example, when you see the literature, there is a nice review recent also, Lee et al. On motor creativity contextualized testing, that for example the TCAM test of creativity in action and movement, this is a modified version in the motor domain of the TTCT, of the test of creative thinking of Torrance, so the very famous test. But a lot of people, and also that review, use that CAM as a motor creativity, a domain-specific motor creativity test for children. Whereas the name tells it, Torrance had created it as a test of thinking creativity, creative thinking in action and movement, tested in action and movement. So is it a movement-based assessment of creative thinking, or is it a direct measure of creative domain-specific motor creativity? It's a matter of debate. So your answer will be linked also to the clarifying whether we are testing motor creativity or creative thinking in the motor domain. This is a bit complicated, but I think it's the right direction.
Yeah, interesting. Thanks.
David.
So I've got so many ideas swimming around in my head at the moment after your talk, Caterina, and the discussion so far. I'm not quite sure where to start, but maybe I'll just address that issue of developmental changes, because Alison Gopnik, who's a cognitive developmental psychologist over at Berkeley, she's talked a lot about the infant having what she calls a lantern-like attention and consciousness, which sounds very similar to the idea of the mindless creativity that Diedrich talks about. And in this lantern-like consciousness, she essentially argues that it might seem like it's an impediment to the infant because they can't focus on things. And of course, we typically think of skill acquisition in the context of, well, the child's got to be able to focus on what they're doing and be really task-oriented. But she says just the opposite. Having this kind of lantern-like ability and like having difficulties focusing allows them to basically take in everything. So they're not inhibiting anything at all. They're just basically aware of everything. And that's what allows them to see lots of connections between things. And then, of course, that gradually changes over time as inhibitory mechanisms come in, and we get the child who's ultimately going to be ready for formal schooling. As kind of Frederick was saying too. We kind of think of this when the child's ready, it's like the formal schooling type of thing. But so the other thing I was just thinking about too, and still on this issue of mindful versus mindless, a lot of the people who study mindfulness would actually call what Dietrich calls mindless mindful. So, I'm thinking of like Ellen Langer's work, for example. She's done a lot of work in mindfulness. And she defines it, and I think most people define it, as this state of being in the present in an aware but non-judgmental way. So you're not attempting to do anything. You are basically you're there to just be aware of what's happening in the present moment. And so I guess I'm a little bit uncomfortable with this whole idea that it's mindless, because again, other people have said that it's linked more to mindfulness. But then I think we can, again, following up on Friedrich, we can create the conditions where that's more likely to happen, because this is essentially what mindfulness training is all about. It's getting into that state so that you can be broadly aware of what's happening and not overly focused and missing out on all sorts of stuff that could be relevant.
Oh, you have addressed so many topics. I try. So first of all, a misunderstanding. I used the extreme mindful and mindless myself, so my fault. Arne spoke of deliberate, spontaneous, and flow modes of creativity. So the words was not, it's his fault, it's my fault. I tried to dichotomize because I wanted to show a bit the lines of research where they think that athletes only think creatively and then act, and the other will say, no, you are not thinking creatively, but you are facing constraints. So I wanted to dichotomize a bit to give this idea. But I had myself my problems with the flow mode of creativity. First, I thought it was in between the spontaneous and the deliberate, because in the flow experience also properly, Arne Dietrich speaks of state of presence in the now and mindfulness, and we know that mindfulness training improves the capability of flow. So is it that is a bit contradiction, because he considers the flow as the least demanding, cognitively demanding, but the mindfulness as a prerequisite to free the mind from the chains of the executive control. So far I have understood, but I had a bit difficulty because it is, yes, a bit so. And as regards the attention, so I had to struggle as well. As regards the attention, I have in the paper there are some lines about it, but it is very interesting. So Arne, for example, worked a lot on altered states of consciousness. Flow is one of them, in which the mind is freed and the mind wandering is allowed, and that the acute exercise can help this state because it deactivates the executive control partially, acutely. But back to attention, it is interesting that there are works as by, you are right, that if you are over-focused, you lose information and you cannot be creative and create unusual associations of things which are usually apart from each other. If you are focused, you need to pick things which are not close to each other. For that reason, Moraro, a cooperator of Daniel Memmert, and I visited him. I was working on attentional focusing for a while, and it was interesting. They developed then works which show that creativity is linked with a broad focus of attention. So creativity in sports with a broad focus of attention. So likely because you can get more information to get more creative in your solutions. So it might be also linked to your reasoning. So breadth of attention, the broader. And I worked for a while in visual spatial attention, and I've seen that high-level athletes in open skill sports are very quick in expanding the focus, and much more than normal persons as I am. But I don't know if it fits now. So, but there is so evidence that creativity is linked to a wide focus of attention.
Right.
But you're right. So the mindful mindless was a dichotomy created for the presentation by me. It's extreme and it doesn't reflect the entire picture. And the flow mode is totally without the control in the default mode, but is linked to the mindfulness state, which is also reached as an altered state of in altered states of consciousness, as Arne tells.
But you at least sparked a lot of conversation by doing that.
Yeah.
So, Emiliano, do you have a comment for your co-author here? Put you on the spot here. You got to sit back and watch her do all the work.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. I just want to say that it's really impressive to see how Caterina is able to bring together all different theories, things that are presented using different language and kind of bring it back to life in different ways so that we can see the different facets of a very complicated thing, which is, human movement and cognitive functions, how they kind of work together. And I kind of love the what Carl said at the beginning, talking about cognition being at the top. I've been thinking about that since, and because it is a little bit of the control, and it made me think of something that Tom Porosky wrote on the very first page of a book, where he referred to a type of octopus that retreats into rocks, and to give birth. What they do is that they essentially die, but the first thing they do, they eat their own brain.
Yeah.
And so they don't actually need a
because...
brain at that point. And so I'm a bit conflicted on the idea that cognition should be at the top, really.
Yeah, but I wanted to jump in there too, and go back to the infant too, because how is the infant learning? I mean, they're not learning in a very cognitively directed way. They're basically exploring all of these perception action loops. And it's this iterative process of perceiving and acting and perceiving that's ultimately generating the cognitive foundations that will direct that more consciously. So I would argue against Carl that we shouldn't put cognition on top, that we should be treating them all equally as co-equals. My 2 cents, anyway.
In fact, Emiliano, I just saw this wonderful, I think it was a PBS documentary on the octopus the other day. It was, I was thinking, oh my God, I never knew that. That's very interesting. I mean, till I'd seen it also, like you, but going under and just dying after they do that. So
this was such a great presentation, but also a great conversation. I really enjoyed it. Thanks everybody for your contributions.
Yes.
While I was speaking, I was seeing that I was disconnected, and it was difficult for me, but I'm glad that you got the message, and I think David is right. So remember that I dichotomized more to show the lines of research which were dichotomizing and seeing only the one side or only the other side. But Arne, yes, it's complicated how he addresses the flow mode, which is on the one side completely out of executive control, on the other side relying on mindful states, and then related to those aspects of the now at. So I wrote a chapter on creativity. I can share it with you in a book focused on silence, mindfulness, with a very nice colleague, Taldo Tan Ben Susan, who works a lot on mindful movements and mindfulness. And of course, this is an issue of debate.
I think
yes, David.
Sorry, I was just going to say, there's one other line of research I think is relevant here, and again, to creating the conditions where that creativity can emerge. And that's John Sweller's work. He's a retired guy, cognitive science guy, who did a lot of work on problem solving relative to goal specificity. And he was one of the people that said, if your goals that you're following are too specific, people don't learn the problem structure when they're trying to solve the problems you give them. But if you make the goals much less specific, then you encourage the sort of exploration that you're talking about is connected to creativity, that leads them to having a much better understanding of the entire problem space, and not just like a means end, okay, if then this is what I've learned to do sort of scenario.
Good point.
May I ask you, Jane, you posed me questions, only one question of me to you. Do you think that what I feel, you and all of you, but Jane, but all of you, that as I have the feeling the time is mature to introduce motor creativity in motor development and in the understanding of motor competence on one side, and how it relates to cognition, that the time is mature to consider it as a part and then understand the domain specificity and the main general, considering really this uniqueness that we are the body and we have the body. So I wanted to ask you, do you think that in the history of developmental motor learning research, physical activity and cognition research, might it be true that the time is mature to put a focus on motor creativity?
Oh, absolutely. I think that's why we invited you to give this talk today, because I think and then why it's also in as a position paper in Journal of Motor Learning and Development, because there's a certain point in our own evolution, in our own history, as we go from throwing balls at targets to, what is it we're trying to do? And then there's an awful lot of work on cognition and movement. I mean, clearly, both across the lifespan. But I think the creativity piece, only the dancers seem to ever have the word creativity in what they talk about. We don't talk about creativity on the basketball court, and yet it's there, and so I don't think it's like sport is not thought of as creative, and yet at the same time, when we put this all together, I think it's just one of the core ideas. So yes, I think it's time.
Yeah.
Yes.
Because I started with my first paper on it. I didn't perform many papers on creativity, but it was in the 2011. But now I feel that the time is mature to try to push forward this line and see if it can connect and intersect.
Yeah.
So just a quick follow on there. Susan Higgins wrote a paper a long time ago in which she argued that, well, her definition of skill was the creative use of resources. So she basically defined skill with reference to creativity. So
And she's right.
I think it's well timed to bring that into the conversation too.
That's a very good point. I remember that Higgins paper. So yeah, that's great. Good point. This is what happens when you got a bunch of people who have been around for a while. We've read a lot of these old papers. So okay, to be mindful of our time, and also because I have my little slip of paper, I want to remind first of all, well done. Thank you. Very nice. A very nice presentation. This will be immortalized. Remember, this is recorded and it will be up on our website. So I know, I'm sorry, but so, and it's available to be used and be discussed and used in your classes. Next month, Steve Langendorfer, who's there in your picture right now, is going to do his journal presentation will be on evaluating water competence in young children. As a guy who's been studying swimming for a long time, this is perfect, Steve. And it will be on November the 13th. That's not Friday the 13th. That's a Thursday.
Thursday the 13th.
This Thursday at 3:00. Steve, thank you
as
very
Monty
much.
Python would say, and now for something completely different.
Yes. Yeah. Well, yes, of course, competencies. But at the same time, I just want to say that 2 weeks ago, John Cleese, who is 84, I was at the Strathmore in Maryland, where he actually talked about, and we saw the movie again. It's 50 years old. So Monty Python still lives.
Oh, yeah.
And the place was sold out. So that's just a sidebar. So
I saw your post on Facebook. Yes.
Yes, right. Okay. And then the second thing, this is the Journal Club is going to try a different approach. One person had contacted us about talking about work in progress and getting feedback on that, kind of like when you go to a poster session at a conference. So we're going to put out a call for December's Journal Club to be like 10 or 15-minute little vignettes of, here's some data I have. What do you think about this? And it would be great for your grad students or for yourself to talk about this. And if we get a lot of submissions that look good, we might carry it over to January. But for now, we'll try to do it just in our December meeting. And we haven't decided on the date on that, okay? So just keep that in mind. There'll be a call that'll come out as an e-blast, sort of giving you an idea about what that is. And we'll be on the website. So again, Caterina, I'm always amazed that you can.
Thank you for all. Thank you for being here at a different time, from different time zones, very uncomfortable partially. So thank you so much. I much appreciate it. Very much appreciate it.
Well, that's the lovely thing about Zoom, is that we really truly can be an international journal club. So thank you all. And I'm going to end recording
you.
now.
Thank
Ciao.
you.
Thanks, everybody.
Yes, thank you. Where's my stop button?